are needing your services right now. Huge opportunity, not just something to survive through, but actually the place in which maybe you can even jump the shark.
Oh, what do you do with uncertainty? Aside from wish it wasn't there, which is what I'm prone to do, how do you navigate it?
Leaders being really authentic. I don't know all of these elements, but here's what I am certain about. And actually, I think we need to come together to talk about what we can all see. That act is the most powerful act a leader can do.
Can you start to treat tension as data, not an indicator of danger?
Yes.
At times like this, it can feel chaotic, there's tension, people start arguing. Stop obsessing about making the right decision and focus on making the decision right. So in this edition of Breakout Room, as with previous editions, the very important navigating hotel buffet options and strategies. We will refine that and explore that just a little bit more because
and continue
we never
to cover
get tired.
It because it's really important. These are important leadership things.
These are the things people want to know, Betsy.
Absolutely.
Right? If we were getting lots of email at this point, I'm sure much of it would be about what do you do?
All the fans out there, they're saying
That's
things
right.
about this. They're tweeting. They're like, "Hey, if Breakout Room could just cover more international buffets, that'd be great."
What we're also going to talk about is uncertainty. So there's just a lot of uncertainty in the world at the moment. This literally could be recorded any point in the last 7 years. And that would be a very relevant statement. But at this particular point in time, there seems to be even more. So we're going to talk a little bit about how leaders navigate uncertainty, complexity, and in particular, what are the best teams doing right now so that they're both able to stay focused and committed to the mission and to the outcomes that they want to create, and still also have the space to deal with all that might be coming up, both personally and organizationally, with all of the changes that seem to be happening all at once, all over the world. So it's an interesting moment.
And actually, what I'm really interested in seeing evolve from teams is how they see moments like this as opportunity, not just something to survive through, but actually the place in which maybe you can even jump the shark.
Oh, I'm going to listen in. We're recording this in the week that tariffs were announced, they were rolled back, they were put back, right? So just a lot of disruption, a lot of uncertainty. And I think one of the things that I've noticed is just the leaders that I'm working with, and in particular, the top teams, in terms of coming into, how do you navigate and in particular make decisions in this level of uncertainty? And of course, some of it is like literal day to day. I mean, you sort of pick up the newspaper.
Hour to hour.
I mean, often, right? But I think more generally, it speaks to a leadership capability that whether or not all of this is happening or not, I think is something that teams just need to pay attention to, which is, what do you do with uncertainty? Aside from wish it wasn't there, which is what I'm prone to do. But barring that working, how do you navigate it? And I thought we could have a little bit of a conversation around what both we're noticing with leaders and teams that find themselves kind of in these moments of uncertainty. What are some of the habits or behaviors that can help them navigate through it? And maybe even what are some of the patterns that folks can get stuck in? So I thought we could explore that just a little bit. And I'd love to hear, your experience with it, because you work with an awful lot of teams that are trying to grow and, navigate a marketplace that's, shifting, like you said, by the hour sometimes.
It's been an interesting week for me because I've had a lot of opportunity to talk to leaders all over the place. And when I tell you the reactions have been so varied, they really have. Everything from companies who will actually benefit from the changes in tariffs, companies that will actually benefit, international companies that will benefit from that, all the way to people who would be in some really challenging situations and circumstances. One of the things that I have noticed when they're not aware and thinking about it, leaders tend to go inside as if they're going to be able to solve the complexity and uncertainty that's there. And so they almost like retreat and go inside trying to think through it. But the reality is that the complexity of the situation and the complexity of most organizations requires that they connect out. And so I think for me, one of the practices I've been coaching leaders on all week is The moment you feel any level of dysregulation in your system, whether that's like oh my gosh, this is too much, or I don't know what I'm going to do, you kind of feel that engine and you start to go in, immediately look out and connect with your colleagues because
Mm.
they have a vantage point and a set of information that you simply couldn't have because the pace is going so quickly and the complexity is so broad. And I've got a couple of different examples that have occurred this week that when leaders actually reached out, it was like they had just the nugget of information that someone on their team across the globe needed, and they had information that they needed. And when you put it together, it was just more powerful. And I found
Mhm.
that really interesting. I was fascinated by it all week.
Well, it's interesting that instinct to retreat
Hmm.
from it and to go in and to try and figure it out, right? I
Yeah.
think this,
Yeah.
that, I was thinking about what are some of the reasons that we react
Hmm.
the way we do to uncertainty.
Hmm.
And I think part of it is this feeling of a loss of control. I mean, to the extent that we have control, but at least a perception of control, let's call it,
Hmm.
where there's some linear physics at play where I do X and I can predict with some level of confidence that Y will happen. And I think
Hmm.
as soon as that starts to break down, and X and Y are not even variables anymore, and now I'm having to deal with R. And I'm curious where you point leaders to notice that initial, whether it's an instinct to go in or to figure it out alone or to look for more information rather than acting. Like where do you point leaders to notice that starting to happen? Whether it's in their body or in their mind. Like how do they catch themselves early enough in that trigger that they can actually be at choice and decide, I remember Betsy said, I need to go connect with someone. I'm going to go do that.
I think it depends on their reactive tendency of choice, kind of how their character structure is built. So if they're a person who tends to go to a controlling place, they'll feel it. I think they'll feel it in their body first from what I'm hearing. And also from my own experience, I can tell you, like for me, I feel it right in my solar plexus. It's like an engine turning on. And when that happens, I go, oh, look at me trying to solve what a client might do about tariffs. I don't have that expertise, nor do I have the vantage point to do that. But my body desires to do that as a way to gain control over a situation. I often find from my clients who are high in protecting, or if they kind of rely on their ability to think really, really smart, that they'll tend to go a little bit quiet. So oftentimes when I notice they're getting quiet, I'll just reach out and ping. And what I imagine is they're lost in their heads, right? It's like they're going to that distance because they're trying to figure that out. And then my complying or heart-based clients that are more relational in nature tend to want to talk more. All of that has one core element, which is the way in which you act quickly. And so
Hmm.
I'm not suggesting not acting quickly. But I do think whether you feel it in your gut or you notice it in your own silence or your own over talkativeness, that just immediately taking perspective on the desire to do some sort of action immediately pulls you into a subject object relationship with it. So now you can have control over it. And you might say, do I want to try and think through this? Do I want to try and talk through this with someone, right? And those are all fine. But as long as you have it doesn't have you, it tends to be a bit more successful. Yeah. How about for you? What's the alert device that you give to clients on that?
I know for me personally, it's definitely, I notice like a tightness in my throat. I go quiet, you
Hmm.
know, and I think it has to do with a desire for some level of clarity and certainty, probably more certainty. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know what's going to happen next. And
Yeah.
so as a result, I kind of turn on all of my sensing and I
Hmm.
stop doing, right? Which I think is understandable because you're just trying to understand the landscape. I think with clients, there's a couple of things that I've noticed, both ones that have struggled and then others that I think have done this quite well. So the first in terms of the struggle is this idea of going quiet, going in, trying to figure it out. The other thing is I think there's a confusion of certainty and clarity. And I think you can be clear without being certain. And I think there's
Absolutely.
a conflation of the two, right? So there's a
Hmm.
lot actually you can be clear about in terms of what hasn't changed, the mission, the values of the organization,
Hmm.
the impact that we have in society with our customers. So there's always something to get more clear about. I think leaders think that they want certainty and they
Yep.
want to know. And often what they really want is for you to be clear. What do we know? And then in particular, and this kind of leads me into what I've seen some of the great leaders do, they're willing to state what they don't know, and that's okay. That actually not knowing and figuring it out together, that's actually the magic of teams. And
Yeah.
so rather than not knowing as something I need to hide from or push away or not let anyone realize is actually going on, they actually put it right up in front and say, listen, there's a lot I don't know. There's a lot we all don't know. We've been here before. I was working with a team just recently, and they were dealing with an awful lot of change and complexity and uncertainty, everything we were just talking about. The leader reminded them, we went into the COVID era where the entire organization went virtual. No one was at the office. It wasn't clear if you could even transact business in this way. And we figured it out. And now in hindsight, of course, we kind of can see how the dots connected, and there's a little bit of a coherent story there. And I think reminding teams and reminding each other that we've been in these kinds of places before.
Yep.
And what
Got
were the
through 'em.
behaviors that actually got us through them? Because those
Yeah.
are likely to be the same ones. And that we can actually be really clear about and confident in. But I think that's something that I've seen teams do. They come back to those fundamentals and the basics, and they stop treating it like, of course, the situation may in fact be novel and unique, but the fact that you're staring down a lot of uncertainty for most teams isn't the first time this has happened, right? At some level of scale.
Oh, I love that notion. And it's really interesting. Just this morning, I was listening to a podcast. It's a podcast, and they had a guest on who's a quantum physicist. And he was talking about the vibration of authenticity, which is what I think you're speaking to, being authentically in the moment and not trying to make up something else. And he said, we've historically believed that love was the highest vibrational emotional energy. However, authenticity is 4,000 times more powerful in vibration than love. And so I think about leaders as they're deploying into a moment, and what you just talked about, being really authentic. I don't know all of these elements, but here's what I am certain about, and here's what I want to be clear about, right? I'm certain about our mission. I'm certain about our vision, where we're trying to go. In terms of the external environment, I don't know. And actually, I think we need to come together to talk about what we can all see to help us even better. That act is the most powerful act a leader can do. And then to bring that team together to talk through all of those elements and not do it in a way that you could be so easily triggered to go reactive. And the minute you do that, you take away the power of the team. And so I think for them to stay in authenticity and bring together, I think one of the key elements is, how do you bring people together in moments like these? I think that's the unique power that leaders can bring.
This power of connection and what happens when you kind of authentically come together. I mean, I think ultimately that's the magic of teams when they are magic. And they're not always, right? I mean, there's plenty of teams that we've worked with, maybe even teams we've been on, where it feels like, 1 + 1 + 1 = 1. One of the ways that I've seen teams struggle, especially with a lot of the uncertainty that's just, I think, part and parcel of leading today, is with decision making. I think in this desire to be right, which I always think is, I'd rather be right than wrong. So I'm all for being right. Like, if that's a possibility and I can pick one, I'll take right, every day,
Yeah.
twice on Sunday, Unfortunately, we don't get that. And you still have to act, And so one of the phrases or the concepts that I've really enjoyed lately is the Harvard psychologist Ellen Langer has a sort of catchy quote that underpins a lot of her research, which is, stop obsessing about making the right decision and focus on making the decision right. In other words,
I love that.
what makes the decision a good one is what you do after the decision is made. And I notice that so many teams focus and overly, to the point of obsessing, on the front end of that equation. which is if we can just make the right decision where everyone is aligned, everyone agrees, every variance or, problem is addressed, then we can move forward, as opposed to, no, you can't know that you made the right decision. It's like life is not an A/B test. There's not another universe, or at least that we have access to, where there's some version of this team that took the other decision. So
Yeah.
all you can take is the one you did. Now, how do you come together and commit to making that the right choice? And I think that goes along, as opposed to sort of like, well, it wasn't my decision, so I'll kind of hang back a little, or I'll, 80% behind it, as opposed to like, no, actually, now you got to make the decision right. It'll be determined by your level of commitment to each other and to the choice, not to the research necessarily that was done up front. It doesn't apply to every kind of decision, but many.
I have to tell you, so I had this conversation with one of our teammates last night about a way we have deployed a strategy. And he was kind of, I think dismay might be the word, like, man, I tried this, I tried that, just hasn't been right. And I noticed his energy was getting kind of low. And I was like, wait, so you've tried all of those things and they didn't work? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, awesome. So we now know 6 things that don't work. Great. What's your 7th? Keep going. Because we know that what we're trying to get to is correct. You tried 6 different ways to get to that result. It didn't work. Well, that's great. That's 6 different paths you don't have to go down now. Try a 7th, try an 8th. You might want to go get more information, right? And like, what do you need from me to make that okay? And you should have seen the lightness in his face. It was like, oh, so all of my efforts have not been for naught. And I'm like, no, of course not. We just know that those aren't paths that are going to work, which is way better than being like, well, there's 15 different paths that could possibly work. And the reality is the external environment is changing so rapidly that even if one path works today, it might not work tomorrow. As an executive practice, I would rather have you ready to experiment, make it in the right way, bring in all the right people, do the best you guys think. And the minute you know it's not working, shift.
Well, at the very moment that you need people to take appropriate risks, to experiment, and to be willing to fail, I think a lot of the anxiety out there, has actually had the opposite effect, right? So people are less likely to do it. And I think we talked about this in an episode we've done earlier, but this idea of confidence and winning streaks. And what is it, how does a team that has great talent and is in a sense on a winning streak, you take a sports team, for example, what is it that has that come to an end? Because it often ends and quite abruptly. And so there is this idea of what are the conditions in a team, in an organizational team, that really promote that ability to take risks and to try new things. And I think, there's been a lot said about psychological safety and its role. There's probably not enough that's been said about really honest, forthright disagreement. Right? I mean, challenging conversations and, really candid feedback or candid perspectives on things. And I'm wondering what you're doing at the moment to help teams stay open, experimenting, and in particular, having those kinds of robust conversations that I think all of them intellectually know that's exactly what you need to be doing, particularly in times of uncertainty, right? Because, I mean, if these are really the moments you need it. And everything psychologically in us tells us it's risky, hold back. I mean, not all of us, but for most of us. I mean, I think there is a sense of like, if you don't know, better to stay quiet. What's the advice that you're giving to leaders and teams to kind of counteract that?
I think you're right on. Anxiety creates a desire to either fight or freeze. What I'm hearing is that there's an awful lot of people that are going into kind of this freeze right now of like, well, even if we're doing good, we might hit economic headwinds. People might start pulling back. What if this happens or what if that happens? And I think the first step is actually realizing, and this might be a like super capitalist viewpoint. So in this moment, you might say, well, she was clearly raised in the US on this one. But I see moments like this as significant opportunity for teams. Because if people are starting to retract, then there's opportunity that has opened up. And as it relates to like our business as an example, if you are a practitioner of our work right now, that you're helping leaders understand how to deploy themselves amidst challenging situations, oh my goodness, the market couldn't be more needing your services right now, right?
Right,
So this
right.
is huge opportunity. And I think as soon as teams see it as opportunity, not something to be scared of, then they're going to act different. And to your point, I think these are the times to bring out and be excited about any possibility for disagreement on a team. All that means is that you know something I don't know, or you see something I can't see. So let's get it out on the table so that we can take of benefit the fact that we get to see different things, right? Because if it were just me, I only get to see my perspective. And so for me, forthright disagreement and candid perspective giving, it helps you take advantage of the opportunity. Knowing your team, knowing your teammates. A kind of funny, you were talking a minute ago about how you go distant sometimes. If I don't hear from you for it's like 48 to 72 hours roughly, the thought in my head is, you better get to Paul because he knows something you don't know because he's gone quiet or he's traveling, which funny I
Yeah,
forgot that you're going to Saudi this week. And so I
yeah.
didn't hear from you for like 2 days. And I was like, oh, I better connect in with Paul. And then you texted me and you're like, hey, I'm in Saudi. And I was like, oh, he was traveling. But that's like my cue because I know my teammate and I'm like, I've got to get to him and find out what he knows so that I may bring it into the group. I know that's the way you are. And I appreciate that Bill knows when I'm running fast, when my schedule's crazy, he'll send me a note and say, hey, I need to get to you and find out what you know. Because that's
Mm.
my response to anything where I'm a bit challenged. So to me, to sum that up, I think it's one, seeing the moment that we're in is not anxiety producing, but actually opportunity creating. And then coming together as a team and connecting and sharing and communicating everything that you know that could result in disagreement or perspectives that are dissenting, and actually celebrating that we have the opportunity to do that and that we can see things differently because of that. And we want that. How about for you? What are you talking with teams about?
Well, I wanted to ask you one more question actually about it because there's sort of a mental exercise I remember you told me about that you'll often work with teams or team leaders around, and I won't explain it well, so I'm going to ask you to do it. But do you remember the one where it's like you walk in and everyone holds a puzzle piece, but they don't know?
Oh, yeah.
Eh,
Yeah.
Can you say more? Because the amount of times I've used that shamelessly,
I'm
as
glad
if
you
it was
have.
my own, exactly. And so yeah. Well, how does that go again?
So if a leader is a high arrogant leader or high critical leader, they generally walk into a situation and know the answer to a problem. And in fact, they probably do, right? Like they can look at a problem and know. I had a leader this week tell me that sometimes they go into a meeting and if the deck was distributed in advance, the team goes to present the deck and they're like, listen, don't even go through the deck. I already looked at it and here's what I think we need to do. And he told me, he's like, that is so not good. I know it. But it's my natural response. So I shared with him puzzle pieces. So I made up puzzle pieces with a client who was dealing with exactly this situation. Brilliant, brilliant guy. And he would go into a situation and he would find that his leadership style would actually stop the room. Like people would actually stop contributing. So what we say, two things. One, in puzzle pieces, you have to imagine that you as a leader are walking into the room and everybody is holding a puzzle piece that you cannot see. And your job is to get them to tell you everything about the puzzle piece that they're holding and how they think those puzzle pieces might connect.
Mm.
And so you are quietly, totally engaged, listening to what their puzzle pieces look like, having them begin to connect them because they know more about their puzzle pieces than you do. They can see them, they're holding them. And then can you work to get them to put that together? And what are the ways that only you could contribute and snap those final pieces together so that together you all have one clear picture of what the puzzle is versus what you just might think? And so when this leader deployed into meetings like that, the meetings fundamentally changed. So he was curious and inquisitive to know more about what you know, drawing you into the conversation so he could hear all of your perspectives versus giving his own. And that's puzzle pieces.
One of the things I love about it is because you take a really ambitious, thoughtful, smart leader and you don't give them a job to do, it's not a good scene, right? Like they don't know
Right.
right? And so this idea of giving them, in a sense, of actually a very hard job to do, which is a lot of systems thinker, right? It's a lot of analytic, so it really taps the brain.
Uh-huh.
but it doesn't have them sort of stepping in, trying to sort of force answers.
And to like own that they have to own it. In fact, what they have to own is that the system is connecting to itself. That's the key of it, right? And so this leader that I was talking with this week, not only was he going to try that this week, but I also encouraged him this weekend to go get a puzzle, like an actual physical puzzle, and go put it together. And I asked him, I said, do you do puzzles? And he was like, do I do puzzles? What do you mean? And I was like, yeah, do you do like puzzles at home? And he was like, no. And I said, oh, I would go get one this weekend. Go to a puzzle store and get a puzzle and put it together and just notice the amount of satisfaction you get from it. Like I love a good puzzle. And when I'm on vacation, I always do a puzzle because it keeps my very active brain who has a desire to be busy, it keeps it busy.
Well, one of the things that I've seen leaders do, it was interesting. We were doing a team offsite. I was with a leader who sort of, decided after lunch, hey, we're going to spend, let's time box this at, 20, 30 minutes. And just to hear sort of what's on your mind personally, as opposed to like, what's the team concerned about? Or, what about the agenda? It was like, what's on your mind personally? And it was just such a helpful and a useful sensing mechanism.
Yeah.
I think just being able to say it already has an effect, right, on the space.
Yeah.
That people just feel they can put kind of what's going on for me into the space. And so there's a kind of an intimacy and a vulnerability around it. In the end, it actually was a tremendous amount of clarity as well, because I think it led the team to sort of seeing things that they wouldn't have seen, or noticing like, oh, interesting, in that region of the world, this is a high profile issue, whereas in somewhere else, it's something else. And so just to kind of have that more holistic view of, what is the organization that we're actually collectively leading, that idea of just giving a little bit of space, I thought is really brilliant, and trusting that it's going to actually move things quickly once you stop. I do think the idea of time boxing it is helpful. I mean, both so that people don't feel like, oh God, it's just going to be 2 hours of whatever. And it also promotes the ability to kind of like speak up early.
I love that notion. And I love a team engaging in that, particularly teams that are dispersed, right? So you can actually share all that's going on. And I had a call last night, checking in with a colleague. I so appreciated it. He said, before, like a check-in, just a one-on-one. He was like, before we get started, could we just check in and just see how each other's doing? And I always do check-ins at the beginning of the call, but the way that it landed yesterday, for whatever reason, I was also walking. So I've mentioned this before, and I'll mention it again. I think whenever a team can participate in connection with walk and talk, that you actually access a whole different level of information, because you somatically get your body moving, and your body knows a lot more than what your cerebral cortex could even hold. And so I think when you're walking and talking, like, stuff comes out. I think that's a practice that really good teams do well. So he asked me this last night, and so I did a little, check-in on some things that were going on personally. It was like opening day for baseball in Minnesota this week, so there's a lot of excitement.
Okay, yeah.
And then that led into the way I'm seeing the business. And it opened up this whole different conversation and different space. He was in a really different place. And just the kind of marrying of those two things for me as a leader was like, oh, this is really interesting and helpful, because for certain, my perspective and vision was clouded by my own excitement for things that are going on. And to hear what someone in a totally different region of the world was experiencing was like, oh, wow, now I can have a more sophisticated interface with my team because I'm seeing something totally different. And I think that notion of giving space to that in a time box way, which I love that you had to, you got to throw that in there, is just really useful. I think it's really useful, and goes to the notion of connection for our leadership to be most sophisticated and most effective.
What are a couple of, let's call it, tips, points of advice, perspectives that you'd offer leaders at this moment in time?
I've been reading a lot this week about how various world leaders have been choosing to respond to the tariffs. And I want to take a page from the South Korean acting president. So he's 75. He did his PhD at Harvard in economic policy. And his thesis, if I understood the article that I read correctly, his thesis was actually on how South Korea could weather a tariff storm or economic downturn in China or the United States. I mean, this was like 30, 40 years ago. This guy wrote this, right? They're the sixth largest trading partner of the United States. And his response was to slow down, slow everyone down, slow the response down, everything, and look at the opportunity that existed for South Korea as the tariffs were coming through. And I was fascinated. In fact, it was one of those moments that I wished that I had like political connections so I could connect with him and just say, tell
Mm-hmm.
me everything about how you're thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I take a page of his book. I think it's wise. I think there's wisdom in the ability to look at time when things are starting to speed up, people want to speed up, and to slow down, slow time down, and see the opportunity, see the chance for positive outcome, and then choose to see how you might act. The other portion of that is that he sent a delegation to meet with the United States. And to me, that was a connection point. So slow down, be thoughtful, see the opportunity, and connect person to person, to me, are three things that right now I'm trying to remind every single leader to do.
Yeah, the first is it's a little bit of a play on the idea of navigating uncertainty, right?
Mm,
And so I've started to
mm,
think about how leaders narrate uncertainty. So narration, right? So how do we get comfortable narrating uncertainty? And I think, these are moments where your team, your organization, even to an extent the market needs to hear your voice,
mhm,
right? I mean, we sort of know that, like as recipients of that, even just your story about the leaders of South Korea, it's the power of that voice
mhm,
and of that narrative around what are we experiencing and what are we going to do. So I think this idea of narrating uncertainty, what do you know? What don't you know? What are you paying attention to? And where do we need to focus ourselves? And
mm,
like you just cannot say it enough.
mhm.
I
Yeah.
think people, I mean, not that they don't hear it the first time, but there's something about that, which kind of leads me into the second one, which is how do you create rhythm without rigidity? And I think in times of change or flux, people really crave structure. I
Mhm.
think it's true societally. I think it's true in organizations. They want to know, where do we stand? What happens next? I mean, anything that feels like some level of structure and certainty. And while it's an understandable response, what I think is more helpful for leaders is to think more about a rhythm. And so,
Mm,
what you were saying, check-ins, how we make decisions, how do we structure the week? Reminding people of just the operating rhythm of how we get things done, because it can feel like the news cycle and whatever else just wants to blow up your rhythm. And then people just get pulled into their phones or,
yeah.
refreshing the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times every 15 minutes. And that's rarely helpful, right? So how do you build that rhythm? And then I think the third one is, can you start to treat tension as data, not an
Mm,
indicator of danger?
yes.
And because
Yeah.
I think like at times like this, it can feel chaotic. There's tension. People start arguing. Teams that had gotten along famously all of a sudden now seem to have a breakdown. Like all of this stuff starts to happen. And I think, particularly for leaders, to really start to notice it and get curious about it. And you had said this earlier in our conversation, which is, can you get that curiosity dial turned way up? Because I think for a lot of them, they'll perceive it as tensions, disagreements, like problems. And they'll
Yes.
either want to
Yeah.
push it away or
Yeah.
or they'll, even worse often, is insert themselves.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like,
And
we don't
like
have
solve
time for
it.
this. Yeah, we're going to solve this. Everyone behave themselves, like as if that's ever worked, in my house or anywhere else.
No.
But I think, to start using it as a source of data and be like, isn't that interesting? Supply chain and sales are,
Mhm.
increasingly there are more challenges that seem to be getting escalated. What's going on here? And is it reflective of, or does it give us a little bit of insight into something that might be emerging in the
Yeah.
business? Aside from the
Yeah.
fact that I think just being curious is a way better way to navigate anxiety than almost anything else, because it gives your brain something to focus on. And to your point, it allows you to think of constructive opportunity-based solutions as opposed to kind of reactive, how do I make this go away or pretend it's not there, which in the end is, temporary relief, a long-term problem.
I have a leader that I've been working with for a while, like 2 years. I've been trying to get him to make this move from reactive responding or even creative responding into just awareness. I can get him there, but then he acts really quickly. And so it just so happens that we have recently collected some data, and the data on this assessment of his team broke through for him and allowed him to take a perspective on them that I haven't been able to get him to do in coaching. I just want to share that it was a really interesting thing. And what I noticed was that sharing the data, sharing my analysis of the data, then had him starting to apply it and being able to take perspective on business situations that were occurring, but he could take perspective on it from more of like a systems thinker than a critical thinker or even a ambition-based thinker. And I got this great message at the end of last week and then one at the beginning of this week around like this aha of what I'm seeing. And it was this access to curiosity that he has not demonstrated quite as often with me as he did this last couple of weeks. And so it was like all of a sudden the data and assessment allowed him to be a systems thinker in a way that he hadn't before. And I was fascinated by it. And actually I said to myself, dang, I wish I would have done that like a year ago with him. Right? Because because then for the last year he could be accessing that. But it was like just this beautiful foray into systems leadership. And it was like a room that he hadn't been in like a house or something. You walk in, you're like, oh my gosh, this is the best room. Look at all this stuff I can see. I didn't realize this is what was happening. I was so frustrated by that, but I was just dealing with the frustration, not the understanding of what that created. And so I guess the other thing I would say is the work of gathering data might be a way that people can gain access to that curiosity if they can't get there another way. Okay. How was Saudi?
The work was good, and it's fascinating. I mean, we talked a little when I was there. General experience. I mean, so there's three things I would say. Number one is, even at a national level, the power of a compelling vision, like Saudi 2030.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone knows it. Everyone knows what it means. Everyone understands the KPIs behind it. It's like that country is moving, and it is coordinated, and it's moving as one. And so that was just really interesting. Yeah, like what vision. And obviously, I mean, it's not a democracy, so it has different ways of doing it. But so anyway, so that was number one. The second thing is, like, it's amazing what you can build when you have almost limitless funds.
Oh, right.
And you really want to make a mark in the world, right? So, like, I mean, obviously they've tried to bring in all of these athletes. There's a whole live golf thing, right? And then even in Riyadh, like the metro system, which genuinely is the most beautiful metro system I've ever seen. I mean, it is tap in, tap out with any credit card. Like, everything is seamless. It works. The stations are empty. Like, there's just no one.
But they're building for 2030, right? They're building for.
I guess, yeah. Like, I think that's the whole point. Yeah. And National Museum, again, amazing. It starts chronologically with like kind of the geography and the land. I mean, even to the prehistoric, and then obviously through Saudi history. And I mean, it was a Monday, so I don't know what that means. But so it was a weekday. But like, I was the only one there.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's just really, and just big, grand, beautiful. But and that was generally, I mean, there was traffic here and there. So, I mean, people were out and about, but so I don't know. I think it's a culture where a lot of things happen in homes for lots of reasons.
That's what I have always
traditions
heard.
And yeah.
I used to work with an oil company, and they told me that all of the real business occurred behind closed doors in homes, and that they would have like the meeting, and then they'd go back to their hotel, and then they'd get picked up to go to have the like actual meeting at someone's home. How was the buffet?
In tradition, like for all over the place in terms of regions and cuisines, right? So I mean, you had like the Italian station, sushi, just really broad, too broad. I think it's really hard to play that wide, and I think they could have focused. right? And I came up with I realized that actually, particularly for lunch, you have to pick a cuisine. You can't just go at it as a buffet. It will take you in too many rabbit holes. You're like, oh, they have dim sum. Wait a minute, let me put back the ribs.
Lasagna.
Let me put back exactly the carbonara I just took out of the Italian stage. So I came to the conclusion of you got to pick a cuisine and you got to stick with it, and you got to
Yeah.
work within the boundaries of that. It's like freedom within the framework, right? Um,
Yeah. I
breakfast
think
buffet a little bit easier, but yeah, the lunch buffet was too broad.
what happened to me on that one trip when I got chicken averse, what I did was I stuck with a cuisine, which was just edamame beans. And that's all I ate all week. And that was hard.
That's not a cuisine. That's a specific vegetable. That's like
It was
broccoli is not
all
a cuisine.
it was all I could eat all week. And like just anything else just seemed wrong. And I just stuck there. And I'd even get like peppers or lettuce, like thinking, and I'm not a vegetarian, but it was the week of edamame beans. And I looked very thin at the end. And maybe a slight bit
Yeah.
malnourished.
Yeah. I clearly did not have that experience. It was definitely. Can I say the other thing that I rarely eat, and every time I do, I'm reminded how good it is, and they were ridiculously good, are dates.
Oh yeah, you texted me about the dates.
And then they give you this box of, I told you, I think I even sent you a photo because that
Yeah.
was like guaranteed gone by the end of the trip. I nearly did it. So what do you have planned for the coming week? What are you heading off to
Oh,
between now and the next time we speak? Where's the world taking you?
so what do I have coming up? I have very exciting things coming up. So this afternoon, I have a long lunch with a client where we are planning out their executive retreat, which occurs in 2 weeks. And I just got data back on that team. I've been working with this team for a year, and I have 3 data points. And this last one, they crushed it. So I have great data to present this afternoon, and I am so excited I can hardly contain myself. So that's this afternoon. Next week, I am with a team that is looking at how do they work together even better. They exist in a matrix structure, so it's kind of a team of teams model. And so we're looking at how are they reactive, where do they want to be creative, and how do they come together as a team in this construct, and then also in a business unit construct at the same time. So that's exciting. Then the week after that, I have another executive team session. It's kind of the season, right? Um, and I also have, which I think is going to be very interesting for our conversation that week. I have a team that's in some really significant challenge, really significant challenge. And so we're almost going to the place of kind of team mediation. So I have like a team mediation session, and then the next day, an executive team session. So it's going to be fascinating. And I have a couple debriefs along the way there. And I think 8 baseball games.
So for me, a little different. I just came off quite a bit of quite a bit of work, team sessions, a bit of travel, and I'm now. Let's see, we're recording this on Friday, so on Sunday, I'm grabbing my dog and my some luggage and getting in a car and driving to Italy. So we're going to be in Italy for a good probably a week and a half. So Marilyn is going to fly. She always feels so guilty about me driving because we like to take the dog, and it also lets us take just without having to deal with luggage and things. And I cannot tell you, as much as I absolutely love spending time with her, and I would have absolutely no problem with a long road trip. A little bit of time with me, my dog, and some audiobooks and some podcasts driving across Europe.
Oh,
It's good. Well, Betsy, another great breakout room.
very fun breakout
mean,
room. It was wonderful to talk with you today and to hear about your travels, past and upcoming. And I'm looking forward to our next one, which is in 2 weeks.
Me too.